All righty. Waiting for it to go live. Insiders and veterans from north to south, east to west, from here to the Philippines. We are live here on Brian Reese's channel. My name is David Pineda. I am one of your veteran claim experts here at VA Claims Insider and also the brand ambassador. I'm going to let a few folks chime in, make sure they can hear me correctly and see me, and then we'll kick off. Today's topic is going to be C&P tricks and tips, as well as what to do if you have a bad C&P. So I'll give it a few minutes to see and make sure people can see and hear me. Let me open this up on another page so I can see the comments as well. Okay. Let's go ahead and all right, so we have a few viewers. If you can hear me pretty clearly, just give me a thumbs up, pop some questions in there, and I'll be able to see that as well. Let me open this up on another page. Chad, I see you, brother. What's going on, my man? Awesome. Can you hear me pretty clearly? I just want to make sure the sound is working. Awesome. Thanks, Bruce. All right, we'll let a few folks begin dialing in and connecting. So we'll go ahead and give them a few more minutes and then we'll start. I usually like to give about a good 2-3 minutes. So it's 12:03 over here on my side of the house. So we'll give it about 2 more minutes, let folks start coming on in. Hey, Eugene, thanks for coming. Matthew, we'll get to that in a second. Thanks for joining. If you have any buddies that might want to see what we're talking about today, again, the topic of the day is C&P secrets, 3 C&P secrets, and what to do if you have a bad C&P. Ricky, appreciate you, brother. All righty. Let's see. Awesome. Awesome. Matthew, welcome. We got Ernie in the house. Appreciate you, brother. All righty. So I have a few things we want to discuss today, and then I want to also share some visual things for everyone so we can go ahead and provide some more value beyond just talking about some things. So I want to give you some resources today, talk about C&P preparation. This is by far the most important day of your VA claim process. Many individuals kind of, they get terrified. They have ideas. They've heard things of what to do. So we'll cover some tips and tricks here. And then if all goes south and doesn't go the way it should, then obviously that's an issue. So let's preface it. Great question, Neil. So a C&P, it is the compensation and pension exam. It is how the VA will determine if you meet the criteria for a disability rating. So when a veteran begins to go through the process, whichever way it may be, if it's on their own through with a company like ours, or with a VSO or something to that effect, essentially they'll put in that request. Once that request is put in, what ends up happening is the VA, that goes to a rater. That person in turn will review that information to see, okay, this came in from Jesse, and Jesse wants to apply for a disability rating. I, in turn, as a rater now, am going to request that he go forth and have an exam, a C&P exam, to verify what he's pretty much asking. And that's essentially what's going to happen in most cases. Sometimes the VA will not call for a C&P depending on the situation, but for the most part, we always prepare for the C&P. So the compensation and pension exam is when they get to get their eyes on you and see what you presented and be able to examine you to see if you meet a certain criteria. So that's what we'll talk about today. All righty. Doug, what's going on, my brother? Appreciate you for being here. Okay, so we got that. We're good to go. So one of the first things off the bat, and again, some of these things will seem pretty, I guess, basic for the most part. But when it comes down to the C&P, there are a few things that you need to understand. One of the biggest myths is you have to walk in there looking like high hell, like you pretty much are unable to care for yourself and you want to put on this appearance. And really, that's not what it is. One of the biggest things I will always say time and time again with all the veterans that I work with is it is about the symptoms. It's the symptoms, the symptoms, the symptoms, the symptoms. you have got to talk about the symptoms that you have as it relates to the disability that you are claiming. Not so much just, go in, let's say, for example, you're putting in for a PTSD claim. You want to go in there essentially talking to the symptoms that you have, putting your vulnerability. So one of the first things is knowing your truth, talking to your symptoms. And we'll discuss some tactics of how to go ahead and actually talk about that. So most people might not know, but there are things called a DBQ and there's things called a nexus letter. So when it comes to a VA disability rating, the things we have to consider are: one, was it caused or made worse by military service? Then two, the chronicity of that today, right? Do you have a diagnosis showing that that's still something currently affecting you, that's disabling in nature? And then between that, is there a link, right? Is there a nexus between those two? So those three things essentially is what makes up a solid argument. So an example would be, let's say Neil walks, is in duty, and he fell off a truck, hurt his back, went to sick call. There you have it. Fast forward 10 years from now, he has degenerative disc disease, has some issues with his back, and this is now something that he wants to put a claim in for. But between those 2 points, there is, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years. The more time between service to now, the stronger the nexus needs to be. So when we start talking about what the VA comes back as far as their decisions, you often hear people saying or see in their records not service connected. The VA is not denying that you have a condition. Rather, they're saying it's not connected to service. The nexus that says this was caused by service is weak. And the more time you have between today and the time you were in service, the harder it is to argue. Now, let's say if you're transitioning and you just got a service this year, then your argument, for example, for the asthma that you've developed may well be linked back to service. Now, if it wasn't and something that began to get worse over years, that's something obviously then we can look at having a nexus letter. So the nexus letter, when you hear that term, essentially what that means is that your a doctor or your medical provider or a team of medical providers like the ones we have here in our company is able to evaluate the records to show, for example, that here in Simon's case, this happened in service and this today is his current diagnosis. Our medical professional opinion is that these two things are related. So that's essentially what a nexus letter does. But then there's also a DBQ. And a DBQ is essentially a disability benefit questionnaire. So when you start looking at what a DBQ is, consider it like a physical that you would take to the doctor for your kid to be able to play sports, right? So knowing your truth, knowing your facts, that's the first thing. One of the things to look at is, pull up from the VA a DBQ. And you might ask the question, how do you do that? So let's go ahead and look at that right now. So here is the VA's website. So when you start looking at here, how many DBQs are available, you'll see that you can go and Google VA DBQ. Here you'll see that they're listed by form names or by symptoms. So here, for example, we can go ahead and click on form names and you'll see a variety of different DBQs for different conditions. So depending on what is the condition, depending on what exactly you're going for, this is essentially how the VA is going to diagnose and be able to rather assess where you are at. So let's take an example here and look at mental health, right? So there's various ones here, and as you can see, they vary depending on the condition. So you have GI, ear and nose, dental, cardio, whatever the condition may be, most of those DBQs will be used to be able to assess the symptoms, right? And of course, some things are going to be rated based off of another condition. So for example, acid reflux, will get, rated along the lines of GERD. So neurological, psychological, respiratory, sleep apnea, other conditions, and so forth. So in this one here, let's look at a review of PTSD. So this is now a veteran who's going in for a PTSD increase, let's say. Now, this is the form. This is essentially what the examiner, the psychologist in this regard, is going to fill out. They're going to go through this and essentially look at what is the diagnosis and start to fill out key points of information in here. Now, I want to give you a little bit more than that now. So let's look at a few things. So that's one form there. That form here essentially has a lot of information depending on what the condition might be. I'm going to share here a sample one that has different information on it. So this is one that's filled out that, for example, has now somatic symptom disorder, right? Chronic pain, a lifestyle impact. So this one's other than PTSD, but the argument remains the same for what we're doing here. So essentially here you have what the diagnosis is. That's one example, right? And this is the doctor, your personal doctor can fill this out, as will the examiner as well. But one of the key things to note here is this section here. What is the occupational and social impairment, right? Knowing that is going to be key, because essentially what's happening, if we look at the other sheet as well, is we're looking at how these conditions are tallying up to a symptom, right? Same thing here. So here you're looking at 100 rating. This is a 70, a 50, a 30, a 10, 0 rating, or no rating whatsoever. So this essentially is one of the things that you have to look at. Let's say if you work with one of our providers, we have a team of psychologists that we network with that understand working with veterans, and they're able to do consultations. If one of these is filled out by a psychologist, this is one of the key things that needs to be noted, right? But for you, the veteran, you want to understand, what do those symptoms mean? Look up what that may be, right? So where all this comes from is the ECFR. So if we look at the ECFR, right, for mental health, here you have it. These are all the conditions. And obviously this is going to be an eyesore if you begin to look at everything that's in here. But down here, you look at what are the rating criteria, which we talked about, 0, 10, so forth and so on. So when you begin to look at these keywords here, right, what we're looking at essentially is it total occupational impairment, right? Going back to the previous screen, here you have total occupational and social impairment. Here you have occupational and social impairment with deficiencies in most areas. So depending on where your symptoms may be, these are the things that have to be looked at, right? And one of the things that I always look at or try to focus on with the veterans when we're preparing for this is looking at essentially what are your symptoms here. So looking at this for a second here. This is the same rating criteria, just broken down in an easy to read formula here. But one of the things I always like to focus and bring up on is that these are semicolons. These are and or statements. So ultimately what you're looking at here is, what symptoms here apply to you. And sometimes you have veterans that they'll go in and, pull up the ECFR to be able to look at these symptoms. Again, I would recommend to go to Military Disability Made Easy, one of our websites that actually is part of our network. And here you can look up and do a search for mental health disorders, and it will break down beyond those key things. What exactly is it that those words mean, right? What does that rating at a certain level come up to? So all those different things begin to be formed here. But ultimately, one of the biggest things I want to share is that you need to know your details, right? So you're going to the C&P, but you want to know what you're going in to speak about. One key thing that many people don't understand, or they kind of diminish it, they'll do their homework, they know the symptoms, they have their paperwork, but they figure, you know what, Rick, when I look at it, this is where I'm at. I'm at the 70. This is where my symptoms are at. I have some things maybe, or it might be at say majority is 50, right? But I have a few things to the 70, but I'm not going to talk about it because I have to have all the symptoms in there, right? Not correct. So if you actually go back to the CFR and go a few steps further, one of the things I would offer to you here is this: where there is a question as to which of the two evaluations shall be applied, the higher evaluation will be assigned if the disability picture more nearly approximates the criteria required for that rating. Otherwise, the lower rating will be assigned. What that means essentially is when you start looking at this, right, and this applies, I'm just doing one example here, but ultimately looking at if you have here an instance where one condition is where most of your symptoms are at, but you have now symptoms that are creeping into the higher level, they can consider that and say, okay, let's say in Bruce's case here, he's at the 50, but he's showing symptoms at the 70, round up, right? So speaking to those key things is very, very important. One of the things that I'm very against, and I don't like saying so much, is keywords. These are not keywords. These are symptoms. If you have these symptoms, you must speak to those symptoms. You must speak about that. When you're looking at a DBQ, one thing I would tell you is a number two thing. So number one, you want to know obviously your truth and your symptoms here, right? Know what you have, but then use that information correctly. If we look at, for example, this DBQ, this is a medical document. how would you present this document to a medical provider? And I always say this because we have instances where a lot of veterans will go to a C&P or they've had a bad experience, and immediately it's like, you know what, Dave, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to fight the man, and I'm going to fight the system that's been holding me down, and I want to record this, and I want to stop. I'm going to do research on the examiner. Stop. I want to focus on the symptoms. The symptoms are the symptoms are the symptoms. Your job is to go in there and speak about how you are. Be vulnerable and open, right? So one, know again your key things, know your symptoms, know what you're dealing with, right? And then if you have a nexus letter or you have a DBQ that you want to take with you, you want to be able to show that and use that correctly. You want to be able to use that as medical documents. I always say, for example, if I were to go, and I'm just using names here because I always like to do this when I'm talking to folks. Let's say Kevin is the doctor. I'm going to see Dr. Kevin, but I'm bringing records from Dr. Jesse, right? I'm not going to walk into Kevin's office and just say, here, take that, right? That's not how you would do that. If you were having a conversation with a new doctor based off another doctor or going for a second opinion, how would you treat that conversation? How would you present that information? If I were to go, let's say, to a new urologist, and I was talking about what my previous urologist found that I had, and we're talking about my prostate, I would be talking about what was found. So when it comes to these things, it's about looking at what's the value of what my symptoms are, right? So these are the symptoms I have. I've been in therapy. My psychologist made me aware, for example, that I have these symptoms. I didn't know that the things I was doing was grossly inappropriate in nature. I thought that it was my duty to help people who didn't know how to drive by getting out of my car, chasing them down, and using a bat. I didn't know illicit drugs was something that was not normal to cope with my symptoms, or you fill in the blank of what might be a gross inappropriate behavior, right? But that's just an example, right? It just sounds more genuine when you're able to actually reference the facts. I didn't know I had issues with my prostate until I went to the first doctor, right? And now I'm aware after that. So it's the same way this way. Use the medical information that you have to your benefit so it makes sense, right? So the higher to rating is one of the things I would say, keep that in mind. Look up your situation of what you're dealing with, right? Let's say, for example, it's not a mental health situation, and what you were dealing with here is GERD, right? Come back to Disability Made Easy, find your uh, symptom, for example, do a search for it. All I did here is I typed in GERD. I went to the second one, the analogous and equivalent code for rating. So I'm looking for GERD. I'm going to do a find, and I'm going to type in GERD. And I know for a fact that GERD, acid reflux, is rated with a 7346. A 7346, if we look at it, this is the rating criteria, right? So knowing, okay, if I'm at 10 and it says that these are the symptoms, because I only have 2, but I'm actually having shoulder pain. I'm having, let's say, food coming back to the back of the throat, pain in the upper arm and shoulder, swollen, trouble swallowing, upper abdomen issue, pain, and so forth. These are the things right here that you need to be able to speak on, right? And if your symptoms are going above that to the higher bracket, that's where being able to talk about those higher symptoms comes into play, right? Because maybe you have symptoms at the 10, but the symptoms are starting to go into the 30 range. Or maybe you're at 30, but the symptoms are encroaching into the 60 range. Again, talking about the symptoms. And that's the key thing you need to be able to talk here, right? So the higher of 2, again, that's in the CFR. Right here, if you look at it, you can look at higher of 2 evaluations. That's one key thing I have to stress. I can't tell you how many times someone gets underrated because they don't make a point to actually share the details that they have, okay, of where they're at, their symptoms. 2 being you're at your worst, right? You want to go in there and essentially be at your worst. And I'm not saying that you have to put up, you need to explain to them what your symptoms are at your lowest point. One thing I can tell you is, for example, my therapist made a good example of when it comes, for example, to mental health. It's a pendulum. There are instances and days where I have, let's say, a 100 disability, let's say, or there are days where I might be at a 10, right? So the pendulum kind of swings depending on where you're at. And we've all been there, right? There's instances where your symptoms one day might be here and another day might be here. And that's what happens, right? You have chronic pain. You might have instances where the chronic pain is really bad, but also not so much. right? Flare-ups. What happens when you do certain things, right? So being able to speak about that and humanizing your key points, right? Brett talked about one of our VCEs here. Brett talked yesterday. If you haven't seen it, scroll down in this page on Brian Reese's channel. He did a live and he talked about personal statements and talking about your truth and reality. And that's a key thing because I use one example of saying, let's say Todd has a bad shoulder, right? So Todd has a bad shoulder, and I in turn also have a bad shoulder. But Todd is able to elaborate that he is unable to pick up his, let's say, 2-month-old child or niece or nephew or grandson, what have you, right? That tells a whole different story. How does that disability affect you? I am unable to help with groceries. I am unable to move furniture in the house. I can't do the things I'm supposed to be able to do because of my rated disabilities, right? That begins to tell now a different story versus here's a sick call slip or here's a document from someone. You have to be able to tell your story, right? Yesterday, the conversation was the personal statements, but now it's when you go in there, you want to speak your truth. This is your time and your moment for them to be able to write down and capture the things that you're dealing with. So that's one key thing to be able to use, right? So the higher, again, of two evaluations, keep that in mind. Look up what those symptoms are, okay? Let me stop sharing this for a second. Look up what those symptoms are. Look up the medical evidence you have and know it cold, right? You want to be able to know what you're presenting to them and obviously having not your best day. What are you at your worst? How are you at your worst? Because that's what you don't see there, right? So it's not about going in there, looking a hot mess. It's about going in there and speaking about what your symptoms are and being able to tell them, for example, for me, this is what happens, right? This is, for example, let's take a situation where you have to be able to talk about how many times during the night are you getting up to urinate to relieve that pressure, right? Knowing those symptoms, because if you, for example, are saying you're getting up so many times during the night or having to pee, let's say, so many times during the day, that's avoiding dysfunction, right? So that's something you need to be able to put numbers to. If you're having migraines and, for example, they're debilitating in nature, you need to be able to speak about the symptoms of how those things affect you, because you'd be surprised how many veterans have a rating for something, but they don't know the details of how those conditions are rated. And it hurts you in the long run. So let me see here. If I pull up, because it's always good to kind of show stuff. I can say it, but when you see it, it just kind of makes a little more sense. That's the way I always look at it. So here, right? One of the biggest things to look at is PROS rating, right? We'll talk about migraines here. If you have a rating for migraines or you're going for a rating for migraines, you have got to know this. You've got to know what the symptoms are, because this is essentially how you're going to be rated. So this goes back to knowing your truth, but also knowing how they're going to rate these things, right? If it's more than one a month to a month, this information is key to know, again, to be able to speak about how those things affect you. Okay. We'll get to some questions here in a little bit. Bruce, yep, the key, tell your story. And that's what happens. One of the biggest things that I think has come back when they've asked judges at the BVA as to what's been the issue, right? Because typically what happens is a veteran puts a claim in, he puts some paperwork in, there's no personal statement, he goes to C&P, doesn't say much, gets denied, appeals it, waits for years, and then next thing you know, what ends up happening is you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and eventually you get a hearing and you stand in front of the judge, or you have, virtual hearing, what have you. And essentially the question is, all right, tell us your story. What's going on? And then you put it all out there and you speak about all these things. And one of the things that one of the judges came back and shared as some of the tips was, if we knew this from the beginning, it'd be a different conversation, right? You have a chance to tell your story during the personal statement. You have the chance to tell your story at C&P. And if you're not vulnerable and put out that truth, it's going to hurt you. One of the things I always tell my veterans is, what got you through service is hurting you after service. We all get it. We didn't complain. We don't go to sick call. We don't want to be that guy, but at the end, or girl, but at the end of the day, the biggest issue is this will hurt you. These are the things that if you're not speaking your truth now because you don't want to show that you have an impairment, you're not going to get rated for disability. How is this impairing to your lifestyle? Which means you've got to put the ego aside, right? Yes, it sucks that I can't do physically the things I want to do anymore. I can't do the job that I wanted to do, right? I'm in the process of going through a medical retirement. It's not fun. It sucks for me. You know what I mean? I left the military, went into law enforcement, and that is not something I can physically do anymore. You know, and it's like when you leave the service, right? There's that adjustment period, and for some, it causes adjustment disorder. There's anxiety, there's depression, because this identity of being in uniform is no longer my reality because I couldn't do that. Then you go to another job, you don that, and if that then also becomes something you can't do, again, that's a blow to the ego, right? So being able to be open about how that affects you, right? My identity as what I identified as, right? Those things I used to do, I can't do that anymore. As a father, as a husband, there are things I can't do. That has to come across on a C&P. That's what it comes down to. You have to tell your story, regardless of what it may be. Okay. Um, all right, so we talked about that, and we talked essentially, so being at your worst, the higher of two, and then essentially knowing how to use your medical evidence correctly, right? You want to be able to present that as medical evidence. Prepare for the exam, not the examiner, right? Know the higher of two ratings, and then know the facts that you have as far as your medical records. Now, let's say you accomplish those three things. You know, I was vulnerable, I knew my things. Um, I had my records. I knew what the rating criteria was. I did everything by the book. And that examiner was the worst. You know, it's completely dismissive, did not pay attention to what I had or pay attention to my symptoms, right? I did everything you said, Dave, and it was a wash. You have rights. It's not over. You have immediately the right to punch back. Okay. I will take you to our website here, which has a lot of good information, but one of the things we do here at VA Claims Insider, we write a lot of blogs and information. And one of the things that you need to be able to do is punch back, right? So if you have an instance here, for example, where you are denied your disability rating, you can punch back. You have the ability to call the 1-800-827-1000 number and complain and say what happened. I always look at say, okay, as soon as you are denied for something, you have the option to punch back immediately. You call the 1-800-827-1000 number and let them know. Verse yourself in some of this information we have here for you. When you go to vaclaimsinsider.com, go to blog on the bottom, right? So when you come to the main page, you'll see here, just so I can show you where to go. You come to the main page, you'll see the man himself right here, Brian Reese. Obviously, as the bearded wonder here, I'm not him, I'm in this channel, but you'll see here are some stats on veterans that we've helped. But if you come down to the blog section, you have a lot of useful information to cover various things, to cover how to write a letter, C&P examinations, and tools that we have available. But I would offer to you that when you are looking at punching back, if let's say the claim does not go, the C&P does not go the way you expect it to go, you have the ability to call and complain immediately, right? It has to happen because what is going to happen is you walk out of that C&P rating, for example, and immediately those records and those notes will go to the rater. Now, if in the process of that, what ends up happening is you complain, you call it 1-800-827-1000 number to complain of what happened with that C&P rater, C&P examiner that was not prepared, did not know what they were doing, or they were unprofessional. You as a veteran have the right to punch back and then put together a memorandum for record. Now, that memorandum for record is essentially saying, this is who I am, this is what happened, I request a new C&P. But it has to happen very quickly. You have to do that pretty much on the heels of the exam. Now, there are instances where you won't know, right? You can go in there and it's like, Dave, I couldn't tell. Couldn't get a read. It looked like it went fine, but I just don't know. Okay, that's fine. You have the ability to then, go through the appeal process as needed for a higher level or supplemental if we need to. But one of the things here to note is that if you know deep down that that was not a good examination, you have the ability to respond immediately and put together a memorandum for record to be able to speak on that. One example of what that might be, we, for example, have something we work for our clients, right? Here you have one simple one, to whom it may concern. This is a memorandum for record that covers basically who you are, what happened. And this is, again, just like a template here looking at what you're asking for, but essentially you're politely asking for another CMP because this is what happened. I, as a veteran, have done this. This is what I've dealt with. This is what happened at the CMP. And now, essentially, I am requesting a new CMP, and this is what happened during one. He or she was unprofessional. He or she did not have time to talk to me, rushed me. I was supposed to be there on time. The examiner was late. An hour passed, he didn't show up, or the examination lasted all of 5 minutes and he wouldn't let me talk about, or she wouldn't let me talk about my symptoms or what was going on, or I was there for a back examination and a range of motion wasn't even given to me, right? Like things like that, you need to immediately give that information out because it's not so much about you. It's if the VA has an examiner that is not doing their job, we have to hold them accountable. So now we in turn are able to complain so that the next veteran doesn't go in there and have to deal with this, right? Enough of those complaints get logged that eventually gets back to the rater and to the VA to be able to say, okay, this person apparently, we keep getting pushback of what they're doing, what's going on here, right? So ultimately, it's about knowing what your rights are. So if you have a bad CMP, right, you've done all the good stuff, you're prepared, you had some tips, you have your records, you knew how to use that, you presented it respectfully, you had your worst day, you were pretty much open to your reality, as embarrassing as it might sound, and still, it was a bad exam. You now can call, and as a veteran, you have the right to request a new one, right? You may get one, you may not get one. I can tell you, I had one of my veterans literally call me right before the show or this live event. And what happened was we did a CMP preparation last week. He had his exam the next day, so we did one. I think it was what was it, Monday evening or Thursday evening? Monday evening. He had the exam the very next day, and he texted me immediately and said, "Hey, this didn't go well." I said, "We talked about this. Call the 800 number, put together a memorandum for record, submit it to eBenefits into the claim, and complain." And fast forward, immediately the claim moved into prep for decision. He called me up yesterday and sent me a text rather and says, "Hey, my claim is in prep for notification. I think that it's a dead subject." And my problem essentially is saying, "Hey, you have the ability to now, if we have to appeal it, we will, but let's see what happens." And sure enough, the information came back. He got his rating. He went to 100% literally this morning, and he had a horrible CMP. The CMP examiner told him essentially, "You don't meet the criteria for an increase. I don't know why you're here wasting your time." And so forth and so on. Condescending, didn't really let him speak his truth at all. He was respectful, kept his bearings. But basically, the whole CMP lasted all of 10 minutes. He didn't have the ability to even talk about what he had. And he was trying to share, and the person didn't want to hear it. Fast forward, complained, went to the process. No CMP was requested. He did get his rating, right? Because there was proof in the claim that had his other records, right? He had a DBQ from one of our psychologists. He had his statement in there as well. And essentially the rater looked at that, made a determination, saw the complaint, looked at this stuff, check, off he went. And he had his rating. And it has happened many a time. So you have the option to punch back. And if the case would have been in his case where, let's say, that would have been denied, we would have gone for a high-level review and exhausted those means. So there are options. So the biggest thing here to focus on is that we have options. You don't need to feel like you're on an island by yourself. If you choose to work with us, for example, one of the things that we are providing essentially is the ability to work with a veteran claim expert. We have a variety of veteran claim experts that essentially are here to work with you. We are veterans helping veterans, disabled veterans helping disabled veterans. Key in that being that we have walked that walk. We have been through those things as well. We know what it's like to get rejected. We know what it's like to deal with issues. We know what it's like to be to feel alone. And to have a community is what we have. Like you see in the comment sections, we have a lot of our people here, Todd, Rick, like people that are in our community. We have our own Facebook group, our mastermind, and it's grown exponentially. I've been with the company as a client since January of 2017, then became an elite member, got my rating. Fast forward, I was asked to come on board as a veteran claim expert, and now I have a team that I've built under myself with various other these veteran claim specialists that are working to help more veterans. So ultimately, we are growing and we're looking to help, right? Because what ends up happening is people say, "Hey, Dave, I thought about it, but this is interesting, but I don't know. I don't know about that group, right? I'll just go to my VSO." And you have the option. You can use any means you want. But if you've been left alone, if you have applied and felt directionless, you need to reach out to us. And I'm saying us in a sense because at the end of the day, we're veterans helping veterans, right? We know what it's like to be cast aside. We know what it's like to be directionless. I'm a pretty smart guy with a few degrees, and I can tell you that figuring out this VA maze, it's like the Matrix almost, right? So with that in mind, being able to reach out and say, hey, I'm going to work with this team and see what they can offer me, that's a big thing that is available to you. So I would definitely would encourage you, if you're not part of our program, check out our website. I'm going to get to some questions here in a minute. So if you have questions, I know I got Sean, one of my veteran claims specialists, in here typing out some answers and replying to some people. We got some VCEs in the room as well. Richard Sheminsky, I see you in here, brother, and a few other folks that are in there as well. So I'm going to siphon through some questions here in a minute. But some quick resources, even for yourself, even if you don't choose to work with us, I will tell you that there's a lot of resources available that I want to make sure that you're able to go and find. So one here, for example, being our frequent asked questions that we have. So if you go to the main page, again, vaclaimsinsider.com, you'll see our information and our stats of what our success rate is, the average increase that we've provided veterans, and how many we've helped. And that number is growing exponentially. Along with a lot of information here, and you can choose to go elite, which essentially is working with us, right? One-on-one with a veteran claim specialist. We're working with you from cradle to grave, soup to nuts, pretty much not just saying, hey, fill this out and send it off, but rather it's sent off. Now what do we do? Let's prepare for the C&P. Let's look at options after that, right? Because different people need different things. And depending on what you have, you may have an 80% solution, but that 20% you need, we may have to give you that. Or you may have a 20% solution and you need 80%, right? We have a team of medical providers and psychologists. If you need a DBQ or nexus letter, we have a team that's able to evaluate your records to be able to help make that argument for you, which many, unfortunately, private providers choose to not do that, right? Or don't feel comfortable providing an opinion. Because you hear disability, you think Social Security. Whereas here we're saying, hey, what's the opinion that in Rick's case, this is related to that, right? So that's one option we have there. We have a team of psychologists that work with veterans, understand PTSD and the various mental health conditions that we are affected with, from MST to depressive disorder to anxiety and so forth, so they can do evaluations and provide a medical opinion, which again helps to make your argument stronger. So options that we have available on top of working with the community and having that specialized strategy for what you need in your case. So when you come down here to the main page, we have a lot of different information. I shared the blog here, which again, it's free of charge. This information is here for you to go and see some of the things that we're writing. These are documents we put together and we share various things on various topics. I've written about my service dog and training that I have, about PTSD and various other conditions. So definitely feel free to reach in here and look around at the various things that we have. Tons of useful information. You'll be able to look at our team as far as who we're comprised of. We have a lot of winners in here, smart people, veterans that care about helping veterans, and we're growing. I had no beard here, so that's an official picture that has to be updated to something else now. Our brand, we have different things here available. Like we talked about, Military Disability Made Easy. This is a great website. Again, we're going to be updating this website, but it has so much information that you can find on whatever it might be you're looking for. You might say, hey, Dave, I'm not going for PTSD. No problem, man. Just look at your condition. What's the rating for the foot, right? So let's look at the feet and let's look at what that is. Because the ECFR, you can sit here and look into it all you want. A lot of great information. This is the law, but it is the law, right? It's hard to digest all this information on different things, right? Here we have, let's say, what do we have here? Digestive system, right? And different ratings, right? And this is hard to really get through. So over at Military Disability Made Easy, we've kind of broken it down, that information in there that they've built up, the plethora of knowledge is treasure trove. So definitely go in there and look at the condition, read up on what it might be. You would be surprised. A real fun fact here is when it comes to hearing loss, for example, right? One of the ones that individuals often don't understand or think is like, well, I have hearing loss. Then they always give out just, 0 or 10%. Not true. Here's a rating criteria and how they put it all together. You can go all the way to 100% for hearing loss if that's where you're at. I have veterans who are 70% and 80% just for hearing loss. So again, verse yourself and know what's out there. Not I heard, but rather what does the law say? What is the information? Um, so good information here available to you. And then we also have a outside of our brands, a calculator. We have the M211 that we put together. So again, a lot of information here, how things are adjudicated, so you can read that information. We talked about the blog, and then we also have here that we've added a frequent asked question section, and this is pretty cool. So we just rolled this out, and more stuff's coming. But the frequent asked question is pretty cool. You can come in here and say, "Hey, I want to look up, PTSD," and the minute you type it, some immediate articles start popping up, right? So it's great to be able to find out certain things you're looking for. How do you file for that? You'll pull it up. It'll take you to our blog. We have a video for it. You'll be able to see it there. So great information there available to you that I definitely want to make sure you had access to. Alrighty, let's jump into the questions here. I see things are being asked here. So let me take a look at what we have. Chad says it's crazy how what was it? I just had it. It's crazy how one condition can affect another condition. And when you look at that, when you start looking at a disability, that's kind of what ends up happening, right? One thing affects another thing. It's a chain reaction, right? Our body is like that song, right? Like the tailbone's connected to this, connected to that. That's one of those things that ends up happening here quite often, is that you have instances where one thing may well aggravate another thing. And without knowing that you can actually put in for that, that's part of the conversation, right? Your bad left knee made you overcompensate to the right knee. And now that's something that's affecting you. And that can be a secondary claim based off of that primary condition. So definitely something to look at there. Okay, let's see. Alan, pleasure to have you here. Question was, can an outside doctor outside of VA complete DBQ? So would it be valid, or would the VA accept it? Yeah, it is valid. Let me pull it back up here. So essentially, if you look at that again, and you look at the VA website, it'll tell you right here off the bat, this is essentially what it's telling to note to the psychologist. Your patient is applying for benefits of XYZ. So essentially, it's a medical standard form that can be taken to any doctor that can fill out this document as necessary, right? Look at migraines here, right? The same information is given up front. Note, your patient is applying to the VA for disability benefit. The VA will consider the information you provide on this questionnaire a part of their evaluation for the veteran's claim. The VA reserves the right to confirm the authenticity of all DBQs completed by private healthcare providers. And that's what we always say, for example, that what's happening here now is essentially they will call you in for C&P to kind of have their own neurologist look at you. But this gives you now that medical proof that may be used, like in the instance I spoke about with one of my veterans, where he had a bad C&P, and essentially the rater came back and just knocked out the C&P that he had because it was a bad C&P and the person didn't do their job effectively. So the answer to that is yes. Okay, let's see here. So funny, we had somebody actually, so as far as having a remote exam, it doesn't really make a difference. It adds to the argument. It doesn't take away from it. We literally had one veteran that posted in our group that they drove like an hour to get to a C&P just to get in front of a camera and have a telemedicine with somebody else. And again, the VA reserves the right to only do that internally for them. But part of the conversation here is that these exams and these medical documents are adding to the argument that you are putting together. So it's not to say just, hey, VA, I got this done by my doctor, I don't need to see you. Negative. You're asking them for a rating. They're the ones paying. And if they want to see you, you just show up and you're ready. Again, you're preparing for the exam, not the examiner. You're speaking your truth of your symptoms. You know how they rate that. You know your story, right? The higher of two, know those things. And then from there, we prepare and plan as needed, depending on what's happening. Okay. Sleep apnea is secondary to PTSD. Yeah, that's also one of the conditions that we see where something is proximately aggravated. So you need a strong nexus letter to show how this may have caused that. There's different ways of things that can be argued for medical conditions. So when someone says, well, can this be connected to this or that? Honestly, the answer comes down to the medical proof. Every single thing that has been decided by the VA in some shape, fashion, or form comes down to a decision being made. So if the decision was made that in this case, for example, this veteran can show that, let's say, his foot injury caused weight gain, which in turn exacerbated high blood pressure and sleep apnea, that's a medical argument that can be made. But you're going to need a nexus letter to make that argument. If your doctor is able to do that, great. If not, we have a team of medical providers that are able to make evaluations and provide professional medical opinions for your condition. Let's see here. All right, so how can, for example, one of our medical providers rate a veteran at 100%, right? So they're assessing and evaluating that the symptoms are marrying up to 100%. And provide a DBQ and nexus letter. The C&P agrees on the 100% P&T, submits the DBQ, and the rater at the VA gives the veteran 50%. I'm baffled by some of these stories. And that happens, right? You could have instances where you request a record and what you provided it and what the C&P provider said it, they look at it and they might not, get it there. I can tell you, I've had instances. So one of our veterans, so PTSD was awarded. The way it was essentially put down was the statement had PTSD for an issue, and there was a lot of language in there for headaches and migraines throughout the entire claim, to include the buddy letters that were part of it. The VA picked up on the recurrence of migraines and headaches in there and added that to the claim. Now, they found that sometimes they'll do that. You'll claim for something, they'll see your records and say, hey, there's other things in here too. Let's evaluate that. So in this case, that was added to the claim, right? So it went from PTSD only to PTSD and migraines. Now, the migraines, then once that happened and we saw that, we immediately added more supporting evidence, including the diagnosis, a nexus letter, and all the things needed for that. That claim that they've added to, or that condition that was added to the claim was denied. Like they found it, they wanted to test for it, and then they denied it. Mind you, we didn't claim for it in that round because we were going to come back to that later. But nonetheless, it was denied. PTSD was awarded. Migraines were denied. We went ahead and actually went for a high-level review. And we requested that another examiner essentially look at the medical evidence, right? So what ended up happening was the second examiner gave an opinion. And part of the opinion was essentially to say the first examiner did not read what rater didn't read the proof of what was provided. And they went ahead and decided in the favor of the veteran. The veteran got that 50% for the migraines, which should have been originally awarded, and off they went. So sometimes it's just the rater who makes a decision. So staying in the fight. If you get denied, the fight's not over. It's not that the world's against Bruce today. It's essentially, literally, one of those things of just pushing documents forward and continuing to press, regardless of the outcome, until we get the outcome that you're trying to get to. We have to stay persistent. Okay, let's see here. A lot of great questions. Okay, sent to info last night. Okay. So what can you do if you've had a bad C&P and your claim has already been denied, right? So there's a few things here. So I'll give you a sneak peek, right? Don't tell nobody. I don't want the word to get out. I'll give you a quick sneak peek. So when you come on in to work with us, we actually have a elite portal. We call it the Elite Experience Portal. So essentially, it's everything in one place for you provided, right? So I'm gonna give you a sneak peek. Don't tell no one, right? So when you come in here, we have a few different sections and modules, but I want to go into the appeal section here. And this is a template of the veterans that I work with, what they kind of get. So I've customized things here, and I have a video talking about different things. But here, for example, one of the things to look at in that case, if, for example, who asked the question? I'm sorry, Eric. So you asked the question. Let's say, for argument's sake, you came to us afterward, and you are missing key things in there, right? I would not suggest a high-level review, right? So here's a form, and there's a video of me kind of talking about how to fill that out. So here's a high-level review form, and essentially here it tells you how to fill that out, and you're able to request essentially for them to look at this information again. And it's a simple form for this right here. So you put your information. Essentially, one of the things I always advise is to not check box 13 because you want another region to check it. Maybe your region just got it wrong, so I want somebody else than where I'm at to check it. So I'll leave that blank. I'll ask for an informal conference that talk to the rater. You have that informal conversation and explain to them what's going on. And then down here, essentially, I'm saying, migraines, were denied, blah, 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 and so forth. And I'm calling that out for them to be able to look at that. Now, that's only if all the records and information needed, like I said in the example of my previous veteran who had the migraines denied, everything was in that claim fully developed and what they needed to win. right? So now the high level review is saying have somebody else take a look at this, because like anything else, if you get a bad diagnosis from one doctor, get a second opinion. So essentially, a high level review is a second opinion. Now, if you're missing key things in there, you don't want to do a high level review, because if it's missing things, it's missing things. 2 + 2 is 4, but 2 + 1 is not. So if you want somebody else to review that 2 + 1 is not 4, you're still going to get the same rejection. So in this regard, we're going to go for a supplemental claim. So within that 1 year of denial, if it was denied, we're looking at now saying, okay, we're going to add some more supporting documents to make this a stronger argument. And this is often what happens with veterans that we're working with that come to us in that case. So Eric, if you had a bad C&P and it was denied, you have options. You can go for a high-level review, you can go for a supplemental claim, or you can appeal right to the BVA. So there are new options available forwarded to you as a veteran, thanks to the AMA, the Appeals Modernization Act that was passed this year. Okay, let's see here. So a question that came up here is, I don't understand why the VA ignores a person's letter from the time in the military and a buddy letter from my wife, right? So looking at that, it comes down to the totality of the argument, right? So I always look at, for example, personal statements and lay statements as being crucial parts of the argument, but they're on top, right? So in the best case scenario, you want to have the in-service incident to show what happened, current diagnosis showing where you're at now, a nexus between the two, and then buddy letters supplement and help to make that argument sounder. Now, instances where you might not have had that in-service record or incident, then having that witness statements or lay statements, that would help. There are instances, though, where a veteran claims for something and the proof of what they have in the system works against them. And that's instances where you've been, let's say, to the VA for the past 10 years and you've never complained about something. And all of a sudden now here comes this new claim with new things, right? You have to be able to acknowledge why there may be a shift there. So that sometimes happens to some individuals. And it's speaking about, why they take you so long now. And again, one big myth that time is an issue here. No, if something happened and it is currently still disabling, the time between doesn't matter. It's just that you have to make a strong argument to make the nexus. But if you experience a traumatic event, for example, in Vietnam, we have a lot of Vietnam veterans. So when people say, hey, Dave, I've been out of service for a while, I'm like, I've worked with Vietnam veterans that haven't had no ratings, worked with us and got a rating. And Vietnam wasn't last night. So it's been a lot of time from then to now. So when you look at that, it's making the arguments of what it took to, get to this point. We've worked with people who have had military sexual trauma, MST, no records of the events, but we're able to tell the story of what happened during this time in their life, how the trajectory of their life changed, what events can prove that, hey, something happened here, and these are the things that happen afterward, right? So there's different ways to make the argument, but if it's all hinging only on personal statements, depending on how it's crafted, you want to make sure that actually the argument is pretty sound. And again, it might just be a bad rater that just doesn't get it right. And you have to make a point to push and have it reviewed by another person, add, let's say, more supporting documents, add more weight to it, put a sworn statement potentially as needed, so it has more of a legal bite versus just a personal statement. So sworn statement versus personal statements are something that's available to you as well. One of the resources that we have also for that, if you go to www.buddyletter.com, we have one of the only online generators here of information, right? So let's say this is a buddy letter generator. You can come in here. Okay, let's see here. And it'll pull up essentially a buddy letter here. And you can look at a personal statement. And this essentially here, you can fill out and provide as needed. And this is great because it gives you those key things of how to write that personal statement as needed there. Or maybe you want to put together a sworn statement, right? A sworn declaration. This is how you would do that here. Again, free resources that are available to you. Definitely head on over. buddyletter.com is the website. And you can utilize some of the resources that we have there for you as well. Let's see here. If you want to work with us, VA Claims Insider Elite is the website. It's a very simple sign-in process. I'll put in my link below as well. VA Claims Insider Elite. So let me show you that so you kind of see what it looks like. It's actually pre-filling to mine. My site is, my link directly is VA Claims Insider Elite with DP, Dave Pineda. But the main site right here they'll take you to is this intake. It's a quick, simple intake process. You fill it out, and it gives you here all the information. And you see here, I live on Happy Street, Houston, just kind of testing out the system. But, you know, this is essentially where you can go and sign up to work with us if you choose to. That's the VA Claims Insider Elite. All righty, let's see. So to John's point, as far as the telehealth, it's the credentials and the evidence. It's, again, stick to the, you know, don't fearmonger, provide your information, put together a solid claim. The evidence is the evidence, as is the medical records that you have for your argument. Cynthia, yep, that was provided down there as Sean gave it to you, VA Claims Insider Elite. And if you add with DP, that takes you to my link. So if you want to work with our team, Sean's on my team as well, so you can work with him directly. Let's see here. Okay. All right, Jesse. So you're going to, you did a FOIA request to try to get your records. That takes some time to get. Yeah, that's one of those things where it's a waiting game. I've seen FOIA requests being sent to us very quickly. Sometimes they take longer. It really kind of depends on the situation. So I would say for sure that you want to kind of wait around. If need be, you can call again and then start to ratchet it up as need be to get those records. Let's see here. How may I obtain your assistance? Bernard, that information, VA Claims Insider Elite.com or VA Claims Insider Elite with DP.com. Let's see. Okay. So Sean, I'm sorry, Sarah had a good question. So what happens if you miss your examinations? You'll look to be reevaluated. And long story short, you know, she called and explained and told them they had to reschedule, got the letter, they were reducing her to 0, called again, and they were told to wait, but there was no nonchalant. So long story short, she had a reevaluation, she missed it, they're trying to propose a reduction. So in that case, what you want to do essentially is fight back and essentially put a claim in to request essentially to keep the rating or, you know, show that the condition still remains the same for what you have with a sworn statement stating kind of what happened, right? There are instances where you will miss a C&P because life happens, so you have the option to provide that. If they propose a letter to reduce, don't freak out, right? It's just punch back. Show them essentially that your condition remains the same, right? I look at that where I say, for example, if they're trying to come and reduce your record, reduce your disability rating, right? You've reached out, you got the medical documents that you need. We put in for that rating to either increase and show, hey, we're not going to, you know, in your case, I'm just making a different number here, but let's say you were at 70, but really they're trying to reduce it, but your symptoms have got worse and now you should be at the 90 mark. That's something that we would actually then, you know, make an argument for and have the medical proof therefore to show why you should not only keep your rating, but potentially go higher than that. So in your case, Sarah, those would be some of the options for sure. And that's something that if you're working with one of us, you could definitely put a plan together with one of our VCEs, our veteran claim experts. Yeah, so good. So Liz, one of the questions was especially, so you can ask your doctor to put certain things together. There's that, you know, the degrees of likelihood. So at least it's likely it's not that 50-50 or is due to or more likely than not, right? So the probability statements, sometimes doctors are a little worried about it. So that's why we have our team of medical providers that are able to help with that, because we do understand sometimes your doctor might be willing to just say, hey, Liz, you have this chronic condition. And then our team might be able to come in and supplement that, right, with an opinion that they might not be comfortable putting because they don't understand the process as it relates to the VA. Okay, let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Correct. All mental health claims fall into the same disability rating criteria that we looked at earlier. So Mike, yeah, so the question was what happens if things start to show up after you retired and it's not in your medical records, like neuropathy or high cholesterol leading to a bypass. So that's where we start looking at strategy, right? How can we make an argument for you to be able to show, hey, this is related to that? So in that case, that's where we would loop in our medical team and put together a strategy to say, okay, this is what caused that. This is how this came to be. So there are instances where that happens, especially like lung issues, being exposed to certain toxins, Agent Orange, Gulf War illnesses, things of that such. Sometimes things present themselves afterward. And then also veterans sometimes don't complain, right? You've had this lung issue and you have never complained about it. And then eventually you start coughing up blood. It's like, oh crap, I think I need to go see someone. Well, you've had this thing for how long, right? So there are instances where sometimes we just don't want to admit that we have a problem or that we're broken and we have issues, and that's fine. So that sometimes can be part of the process as well. But there's ways around that. Okay. Awesome, James. James is one of our clients working. He's working with George, and they are putting together some great stuff. Awesome. Let's see here. You had your exam on 9, 10, and 19. So on average, about 30 to 60 days after the C&P exam. What the gentleman I spoke about, he had his exam results in a week. So it really depends, honestly, on who's processing your stuff, but it should be pretty quickly. But if you just had your C&P exam on the 10th, yeah, you're probably gonna wait a while. I'd say about 30 days on average is a good kind of time frame, 30 to 60. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. Got some of the questions were answered here. So we're gonna go for like 5 more minutes and we're gonna shut it down. I think we're right on time. Hope you got some value of some of the information that we provided today here. Let's see. Okay. So Helia, read me, please. I'm retired from VA Comp and Pen. You are doing a fabulous job explaining the process. It's encouraging for my battle buddies. I've always explained it like this. It's a puzzle to put together. Get help. Refer everyone to you guys. Thank you, Helia. We appreciate the support. And that's really what it comes down to, right? We're not lawyers. We're not, someone just pushing some stuff. We're literally veterans helping veterans, right? Like I literally have an appointment tomorrow with the doctor. Like it's life, we're just regular people here. Like I dub my team, right? So our team, I call them we call ourselves like the average Joes, right? We're just regular Joes. They've been to the process, figured it out, and have versed ourselves. And one of the biggest values to working with, any of our folks is your condition in and out. But we've seen many conditions, and we can look at it and saying, hey, it's not for nothing, Rut, but that makes sense, but you're missing this. This can tie into this, or this is a good argument for that, or based on what we work with, there's different strategies and things that people are not even aware of. And that's really the value of what we have here. It's a master, machine of a think tank with all the VCEs and all the clients we've worked with. We're always learning something. Let's see. Okay. Does it help in the claim process that you're going to the VA for care? Blue button for reference. So, always, yeah. So, like Sean said, always get the care, and it is evidence, but there has to be an understanding that the BVA and the BHA are two different things. So the Veteran Health Administration and the Veterans Benefit Administration are two different things. So, when you look at essentially those two, right, the biggest thing to consider here is that benefits and healthcare are two different things. Oftentimes, someone goes to the VA, they get a CPAP machine because they have sleep apnea, and they think, "Oh, I'm going to go ahead now and claim for that." Well, you need more than just the fact that they give you a CPAP, and that's why sometimes you have things that are missing, right? Because you have to be able to meet those criteria of showing how something was caused or made worse by military service, your current chronicity, disability that you have, and the link between those two. So sometimes healthcare, yes, it can help that, but some individuals just think if that automatically because of healthcare that will enable the rating. So it is helpful. Do get care, but have a strong argument, together because it doesn't automatically relate to the other one. Uh, Jasmine. So it depends. In your case, if you're going for an increase from 50 to 100 potentially based on your symptoms, if you feel that you meet that, I would encourage heavily to get a psych eval, to have a DBQ nexus letter to be able to argue that for you as well, right? Because you want to be able to have proof showing, hey, here's a medical provider that has agreed to my symptoms of what I am saying. Your argument is much more stronger. So the answer to you, Jasmine, is yes. The question was if I attempt to increase from 50 to 100 or higher, would I need a nexus letter? And I would advise yes. It would be helpful to have that, especially when it comes to something mental health related, to make a stronger argument. Okay. In your experience, how long would it take the VA to accept medical conditions and rate a person once your team completes all DBQs, nexus letters, etc.? So it depends. I literally just got a text message because work never ends. One of our clients essentially went ahead and got his rating in 6 days. Yep, Terrell one of his veterans, 70 to 106 days. And again, that it depends on the situation, right? So sometimes it is a solid enough argument that it warrants no C&P. I had one client, one of my veterans like that we submitted her claim a few weeks ago, and she went from 90 to 100, no C&P. It was essentially just based off the medical documents that were given and provided to the VA. So it depends on the situation, but on average, when something's submitted, we've seen claims being turned around in about 30, 60 on average, 90 days. Much quicker than what it used to be, which is a big thing. But again, that's the power of having a fully developed claim, because you're giving them all the information that they need. Okay. Let's see. Average Joe's Gym. Yep, that's it. We have a big sense of humor when it comes to certain things. I'm a big Will Ferrell fan. That's kind of one of our things that we have. So it's always one of those kind of slapstick comedies. It was either going to be Average Joe's or Shake and Bake. Last question. Promise. I don't know, Sarah. How do you know they're rating your condition under the right criteria? Lung condition, something else, autoimmune. So that's where, so as far as being rated correctly, right? So that's where getting a copy of those examination notes and what was documented for you is going to be key. Because if you press your C file and essentially you see in it, they say, hey, Sarah, we rated you for this and we denied the condition because of this record. We're like, well, first of all, I never said that. I had a veteran who was denied for something because they said he had an injury playing football before the service. And he's like, well, first of all, I've never played football. So what are you talking about? Right? But pulling those records, that C file, to see what was actually opined in there, it could literally be that the examiner that was writing things might have had a whole shuffle of paperwork, right, in their desk and wrote the wrong thing or read the wrong thing or fat fingered it, right? So being sure to know what's in there and the rationale behind the decisions made for you, that's how you would know the answers to that. Okay. All righty. So we got a lot of questions that were answered in there. I'll do one more. Yep, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a VA Raider, Average Joe's. Yep, we've mastered the art of dodging the wrenches. Alrighty, so we're at 109. I think that we're good for the day. We'll come back with more information and go there into deeper detail on other subjects as we go forward. Definitely feel free to review this session when you get time. It'll be posted on the page, then it will go ahead and be posted also in YouTube. So again, be vulnerable, know your story cold, and know the higher of two ratings, right? Know how to use your evidence correctly. Again, the higher of two, we talked about that. The higher of two ratings, where your symptoms are. 2 at your worst, going in there at your worst and knowing how to use that medical evidence, right? Being able to talk about the symptoms. If it goes south, you complain ASAP. Put a record, memorandum for record in the system, and submit that with your claim. Aside of that, it's been great spending an afternoon with everyone. Thank you for joining us. We hope you found value here in this information. Tune in next time. We're here every Wednesdays, Tuesdays, and Mondays. Med Team Mondays, Tuesday topics, and Wednesdays we have Brian Reese. I'm covering down for him today here on the main page. And on Fridays, if you're part of our group, we have the VCE Experience inside of our Facebook group, where we come down every other Friday for VCEs, bring other VCEs on. We'll bring psychologists. We'll bring one of the Med teams. And essentially, it's kind of giving you a peek behind the scenes of what we do, how we do what we do, and tips and tricks from working with various clients that we work with. Again, appreciate you guys. It was great. We'll talk to you next time. Dave Pineda coming at you live from the East Coast.